He bought an abandoned orphanage and uncovered secrets buried for decades. Porter Kane thought he was just buying a pile of rotting lumber. The deed in his pocket said the Mercy Home Orphanage had been a ghost for 30 years, a forgotten relic of a harder time. The windows were boarded so tight, not a sliver of light could get in. The floors were thick with a gray carpet of dust, undisturbed for a generation. Every room he stepped into was silent as a tomb, the air heavy and still. But there was something wrong. Children's names were carved into the walls. Not the faded, worn-down etchings of a bygone era. These were fresh, recent. The scratches in the wood were pale against the dark, aged pine, as if someone had been there just days before, clawing their name into the wall with a nail, a rock, anything they could find. Porter ran a rough finger over the grooves. Sarah, Thomas, little Mary. The wood was soft, splintered, newly scarred. The official records were clear. The orphanage had been condemned and abandoned in 1847. Not a soul lived within 50 miles of this desolate place. The nearest town was a 2-day ride, and no one ever came out this way. So who in God's name was carving names into these walls? He walked deeper into the main hall, his heavy boots waking the silence with loud, hollow echoes. Every few steps, another name. More fresh scratches, dozens of them, a desperate roll call etched into the very bones of the house. It was impossible. Every instinct screamed that this shouldn't be happening. He reached the end of the long, dark corridor, and his boot hit something on the floor. He knelt, striking a match. It wasn't a rock or a piece of fallen plaster. It was a small, crudely made doll, its button eyes staring up at him. It wasn't 30 years old. It wasn't even 30 days old. The fabric was clean. The yarn for its hair was bright. His gaze lifted from the doll back to the wall. And that's when he saw it. Carved deeper than all the others, in frantic, angry letters, was a message that turned the dust in his lungs to ice. Milton Floyd lied about everything. The records are hidden. Find the real book. Porter Kane had never heard the name Milton Floyd in his entire life. He was just a man looking to turn a quick profit on some cheap land. But standing there, in the cold and the dark of a place that was supposed to be empty, he had the sickening feeling that someone, or something, had been waiting for him. Porter stared at the message, the flame of his match flickering, casting dancing shadows that made the letters seem to writhe on the wall. The wood shavings around the carving were still scattered on the floorboards, light and fresh. Evidence of a crime committed only moments, or maybe hours, before he arrived. He knelt, his fingers tracing the deep, desperate grooves. Milton Floyd lied about everything. Whoever carved this message had pushed with all their might, as if their very life depended on it being found, as if they knew their time was running out. He pulled the crumpled deed from his coat pocket, his hands shaking slightly, and read it again under the dying matchlight. Mercy Home Orphanage, it stated in formal script. Abandoned 1847. No inhabitants. He'd bought it sight unseen from a bank in the territorial capital. A simple transaction. Tear it down, sell the lumber, make some easy money. That was the plan. But the plan hadn't accounted for fresh carvings. It hadn't accounted for a child's doll. And it certainly hadn't accounted for Milton Floyd. Porter pushed deeper into the building, leaving the main hall behind. He followed a faint trail of wood shavings that led him toward what must have been the dining hall. The floorboards groaned under his weight, each step a protest that echoed through the dead building. Dust motes, thick as insects, danced in the slivers of light that pierced the boarded-up windows. He stepped into the dining hall and froze. It wasn't just a few names here. It was hundreds. They covered every inch of the walls, from the floor to the high water-stained ceiling. A chaotic, desperate tapestry of forgotten children. Sarah Whitman, Thomas Beck, little Mary, no last name, each one carved with that same terrible urgency. But as he stared, a horrific pattern began to emerge. These weren't just names. Next to each name was a number, and next to each number, a destination. Sarah Whitman, 7, Fletcher Ranch. Thomas Beck, 12, Morrison Farm. Little Mary, 5, disappeared. His blood ran cold. This wasn't graffiti. It was a ledger. A secret damning record carved into the walls by someone who refused to let the truth die. He remembered the official papers he'd glanced at in the bank. According to those documents, Mercy Home had been a model institution. The territorial government had even issued commendations to its director for his exceptional care of the territory's displaced youth. The director's name on those papers was Milton Floyd. Porter's hand trembled as he ran it along the wall, his fingers tracing the carved entries. Child after child, sent to farms, to ranches, to mines. But for every name with a destination, there was another that ended with a single chilling word. Disappeared, never returned, gone. At the far end of the hall, half hidden behind a collapsed section of the ceiling, he saw something else. A section of the wall looked different. The planks were newer. He pushed against them, and a small square section swung inward, revealing a dark, hollow space. A hiding place. Inside, resting on a dusty shelf, was a single leather-bound book. Its pages were yellowed with age, the cover cracked and worn. But the gold lettering on the front was still legible. It read, "The True Record of Mercy Home, for Those Who Remember." With a sense of dread, Porter opened to the first page. The handwriting was neat, precise, and filled with a quiet fury. The words changed everything. "My name is Rebecca Hayes. I was the cook here for 15 years. Milton Floyd did not care for children. He sold them like livestock. I have recorded every transaction. This book contains their real names, their real ages, and their real destinations. The official records are a lie. He is a monster." Porter's heart hammered against his ribs. He had found it. The real book. The proof. But as he turned the page, a sound from outside made his heart stop dead in his chest. Footsteps. Heavy boots on the front porch. The crunch of gravel. Then voices. Someone else was coming to the orphanage, and they weren't alone. Porter slammed the book shut, his mind racing. He clutched it to his chest and flattened himself against the cold wall of the dining hall, peering through a crack in the boards. The footsteps grew louder, closer, accompanied by low, urgent voices. At least 3 men. "He's definitely here," one voice grumbled. "Saw his horse tied up out front." "Should never have let the bank sell this place," another one snapped. "Milton gave clear orders, keep everyone away." Porter's breath hitched. They knew about Milton Floyd. They were here because of him, and they knew he was inside. He crept silently toward a broken window, finding a small gap in the boards he could see through. 3 men stood on the porch, their silhouettes dark against the failing afternoon light. They wore heavy coats and wide-brimmed hats that shadowed their faces. The tallest of the 3 gestured impatiently toward the front door. "Floyd wants that book found and destroyed," the tall man said, his voice a low growl. "He said if this fella Kane finds it, we've got a problem." Porter's blood turned to ice. They knew his name. Kane. This wasn't a random visit. This was a targeted hunt. Someone had been watching him ever since he rode into the territory. He scrambled back from the window, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the leather cover of the book. He had to know what was inside. He opened it again, his eyes scanning the pages, trying to absorb a lifetime of secrets in a few precious seconds. The details were meticulous, horrifying. Children as young as 5, sold to ranches and farms across the territory for a pittance. The prices were written in Rebecca Hayes's clear, steady hand. Sarah Whitman, age 7, sold to Fletcher Ranch for $40. Thomas Beck, age 12, sold to Morrison Farm for $85. But the most disturbing entries were the ones marked special orders. These children weren't sold to ranches. Their buyers were listed only in code. Little Mary, age 5, delivered to Mr. G, never to be seen again. He flipped another page, and a single entry made him gasp. Rebecca Hayes, cook, discovered keeping unauthorized records, terminated employment permanently, 1847. Next to the entry, the cook had drawn a small, simple grave marker. She had known what was coming. She had written her own death notice. The woman who wrote this book, who tried to save these children, had been murdered for it. Creak. The front door of the orphanage swung open. "Kane!" The tall man's voice boomed through the empty building. "We know you're in there. We just want to talk." Porter knew it was a lie. He could see the glint of rifle barrels as the men stepped inside, their boots crunching on the dusty floorboards. They hadn't come to talk. They had come to kill him and bury this book forever. He clutched the evidence tighter and began to move, melting into the shadows at the back of the building. There had to be another way out. As he crept through a long abandoned dormitory, he passed more names carved on the walls. But now he understood. Each name was a ghost. A child sold, traded, or murdered by Milton Floyd. The carvings weren't a mystery. They were a memorial. He reached the back door, his hand closing around the cold, rusted handle. It turned. It opened onto a small, overgrown yard, surrounded by crumbling outbuildings. Freedom. He could escape, run, ride away, and never look back. But that would mean leaving the book. The only proof. The only voice these children had left. "Check the back rooms," he heard the tall man yell from the front of the house. "He can't have gone far." Porter looked down at the leather book in his hands, its pages filled with the names of forgotten children. Then he looked at the open door, the promise of escape just a few feet away. Every instinct screamed at him to save himself. But the faces of Sarah, Thomas, and little Mary stared back at him from the pages. He made his choice. Instead of running, Porter Kane took a deep breath, let the back door swing shut, and stepped deeper into the orphanage. He wasn't just going to escape. He was going to find out who Milton Floyd really was. But what he discovered in the next room would shatter everything he thought he knew. It wasn't about the past. It was about right now. Porter slipped into what must have been the director's office and froze in disbelief. This room wasn't like the others. It wasn't covered in 30 years of dust and decay. Papers were spread neatly across a large wooden desk. Ink bottles sat uncapped, the ink still wet. A chair was pulled out, as if its occupant had just stood up moments ago. It was too clean, too organized, too recent. He approached the desk cautiously, the leather book still clutched in his hand. The papers weren't old records. They were letters. Correspondence dated just 3 weeks ago. Letters from ranches and farms across the territory, all addressed to one man, Mr. Milton Floyd. Porter snatched the top letter, his eyes darting across the page. "Mr. Floyd, we need 2 more workers for the spring planting. Boys, aged 10 to 14 preferred. Payment as usual. J. Fletcher, Fletcher Ranch, Fletcher Ranch." The same name from the carvings on the wall, the same name from Rebecca's book. His hands shook as he read the next letter, and the next. "Floyd, the girl you sent last month died from overwork. Send a replacement immediately. No questions asked. H. Morrison. Floyd, require a small girl for household duties. Must be obedient. Discretion is paramount." These weren't historical documents. They were active business transactions. Milton Floyd wasn't a ghost from 1847. He was still here, still operating, still selling children, 30 years after the orphanage had supposedly been shut down. He heard the men's boots getting closer, their voices echoing from the dining hall. He had to move. He quickly gathered a handful of the most damning letters and stuffed them into his coat pocket, alongside Rebecca's book. But as he turned to leave, his eyes caught a list tacked to the wall. The heading was typed in stark black letters. Current inventory. It was a list of names, ages, and locations. James Murphy, 8, held at Miller Farm until buyer found. Susan Cole, 6, being trained for household work at the old mill. Timothy Nash, 12, ready for heavy labor, awaiting transport. At the bottom of the list, a handwritten note scrawled in a different ink. New shipment arriving next month. Prepare holding areas. MF. The horror of it crashed over him. Milton Floyd wasn't just selling ghosts from the past. He was actively kidnapping children right now, using this abandoned orphanage as the secret hub for his monstrous operation. "He's in the back office!" one of the men shouted. Porter spun around. The tall man stood in the doorway, his rifle raised and aimed directly at Porter's chest. Behind him, the other two men blocked any chance of escape. "Put the book down, Kane," the tall man said, his voice dangerously calm. "You're in way over your head." Porter clutched the evidence tighter. "How many?" he choked out. "How many children has he sold?" "That's not your concern," the man said, taking a slow step into the room. "Milton Floyd has been providing a valuable service to this territory for 40 years. Ranchers need workers, farms need hands. Floyd provides a solution. It's just good business." "It's slavery," Porter snarled. The man shrugged, a cold, dismissive gesture. "Call it what you want. It's practical. These kids were street rats, vagrants, destined to starve. Floyd gives them a purpose, a bed, food. They're better off." Porter looked from the rifle pointed at his heart to the letters in his pocket. Proof. Evidence that could burn Milton Floyd's entire empire to the ground. But first, he had to survive the next 10 seconds. "Where is Floyd now?" Porter asked, his mind racing, trying to buy himself time. The tall man offered a chilling smile. "Closer than you think. He's been watching you since you bought this place, waiting to see what you'd find. Turns out, you found too much." Just then, more footsteps sounded on the front porch. Reinforcements. But what sent a fresh wave of terror through Porter was the new voice that cut through the tension. A voice that didn't belong to one of the armed thugs. "That's enough, gentlemen." The voice was cultured, calm, and absolutely dripping with menace. "Lower your weapons." An elderly man walked into the office. His silver hair was neatly combed, his clothes expensive but practical. He looked to be at least 70, but he moved with the unnerving confidence of a man who was used to absolute, unquestioning authority. "Milton Floyd," Porter said. It wasn't a question. "Mr. Kane?" Floyd nodded politely, as if they were meeting for tea. "I do apologize for the dramatic circumstances. My associates can be a trifle overzealous." Porter watched as the 3 gunmen lowered their rifles, though their hands never strayed far from the triggers. Their eyes were fixed on Floyd, waiting. This man commanded a terrifying loyalty. "You've been reading Rebecca's little book, I see," Floyd said, his gaze falling to the leather volume in Porter's hands. Poor woman, she never could grasp the bigger picture. "The bigger picture?" Porter's voice was thick with disgust. "You sold children. You sold them like cattle." Floyd settled himself into the chair behind the desk, the very picture of serene power. "I provided opportunities, Mr. Kane. Orphans with no prospects, no family, no future. I gave them purpose. Ranchers received willing workers. The children received homes, food, and vocational training. In a way, everyone benefited." "Children died," Porter said, the words from the letters burning in his mind. "Some did," Floyd acknowledged with a complete lack of emotion. "A regrettable cost of doing business. But far fewer than would have perished on the streets from starvation or disease. I saved more lives than I cost." Porter stared, dumbfounded. This man spoke of human trafficking as if it were crop rotation. "The territorial government. They praised your work. They gave you commendations." A thin, knowing smile touched Floyd's lips. The territorial government knew exactly what I was doing. Who do you think approved my methods, Mr. Kane? Official orphanages cost the territory money. My system. My system generated revenue. Everyone in a position of authority knew, and they all approved. The revelation hit Porter like a physical blow. This wasn't just one man's evil. It was a conspiracy. A government-sanctioned system of child slavery that had been operating in the shadows for decades. The judges, the territorial officials, even the local law enforcement, Floyd continued, enjoying the look of horror on Porter's face. They all received their share of the profits. Why do you think no one has ever investigated Mercy Home? It's been the territory's dirty little secret for 40 years. Porter looked at the fresh correspondence on the desk. You're still doing it. The demand never ceased, Floyd said simply. Ranchers still need cheap labor. The territory still doesn't want to pay for orphan care. I simply adapted my business model to the changing times. Where are the children? Porter demanded. The ones on that list? Floyd's eyes hardened, the polite mask slipping for just a second. That information is not for sale, Mr. Kane. Porter felt the crushing weight of it all. The evidence in his coat, the book, the letters, the proof of unimaginable crimes. But he also felt the weight of the rifles still aimed in his direction. You have two choices, Floyd said, leaning forward in his chair. 1. You sell me this property back for triple what you paid, a tidy profit for your troubles. You take the money, and you forget you were ever here. Floyd paused, letting the silence hang in the air. Or... He didn't need to finish the sentence. The armed men standing by the door finished it for him. Porter looked around the room, at the maps on the wall showing ranch locations, the filing cabinets stuffed with records, the evidence of a criminal empire that had consumed hundreds of lives. But then he saw something else. In a dark corner of the room sat a small wooden box, and carved into its lid, just as fresh as the names on the wall, were two desperate words. Help us. Someone was still here, still leaving messages. Someone who knew he would find them. If you're finding this story as gripping as we are, and want to see how one man can possibly fight back against such a monstrous system, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. You won't want to miss what happens next. Because Milton Floyd's next words would reveal a truth more shocking and immediate than anything Porter could have imagined. Floyd followed Porter's gaze to the small wooden box in the corner. A flicker of annoyance crossed his otherwise placid features. Ah, you've noticed Rebecca's little legacy, Floyd sighed, standing up from his chair. That woman proved to be more persistent in death than she ever was in life. Rebecca's been dead for 30 years, Porter said, his blood running cold. Indeed, Floyd replied matter-of-factly. But before her, employment was terminated. She taught some of the older children to read and write. A foolish, sentimental gesture, but it seems they've been passing the skill down, leaving messages for a savior who was never supposed to come. The implication hit Porter with the force of a sledgehammer. Children are still here? In this building? Floyd smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. Where do you think I keep the inventory before shipping them out, Mr. Kane? The basement of this orphanage has served as a convenient and discreet holding facility for decades. No one ever comes out here. It's the perfect place to store perishable goods. Porter felt a wave of nausea. All this time, while he was walking the dusty upper floors, children had been imprisoned directly beneath his feet. The fresh carvings, the doll, the desperate messages. They were cries for help from kids who were still trapped. How many? Porter whispered, his voice barely a rasp. Currently 12, Floyd said, his tone as casual as if he were discussing bushels of wheat. Ages 6 to 15. They'll be moved out to their various assignments within the month. Some to farms that need small, nimble hands for delicate work. Others to more remote locations where questions are seldom asked. Porter's hand instinctively tightened on the evidence in his coat. The book, the letters, the list. Everything needed to expose this operation. But Floyd's men were still there, their rifles held at the ready. "You seem disturbed, Mr. Kane," Floyd observed, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Let me share something that might provide a bit of perspective. You see that territorial judge who has been so instrumental to my operation for the last 10 years? He has a daughter, a pretty little thing, about 8 years old." Porter's stomach dropped. "You wouldn't." "I don't make threats, Mr. Kane. I make promises." Floyd's voice was still calm, but his eyes were like chips of ice. "Every person of influence in this territory has someone they love. Children, wives, elderly parents. My network extends far beyond these walls." The true, horrifying scope of Floyd's power slammed into Porter. This wasn't just about selling orphans for profit. Floyd had been blackmailing the entire territorial leadership for decades. He used their own families as leverage, ensuring their silence, their complicity, their protection. "The territorial government doesn't just approve of my methods," Floyd continued, walking slowly around the desk toward Porter. "They depend on them. You see, if I were to be removed, some very important people might lose their loved ones. If you create trouble for me, those same loved ones might disappear." Porter finally understood. He wasn't just facing a criminal. He was facing a man who had built an entire system of corruption and fear that had the territory's leadership in a chokehold. Floyd didn't just have the government's approval. He had government officials as his puppets. "So, you see," Floyd said, stopping just a few feet from him, "this is much bigger than one man's troubled conscience. You can take my generous offer and walk away a wealthy man, or you can join the very long list of people who tried to interfere with necessary business." Porter looked around the office again, his eyes seeing everything with a sickening new clarity. The maps weren't just showing ranch locations. They were showing the homes of politicians' families. The filing cabinets didn't just hold sales records. They held blackmail on every important official in the territory. "Even if I wanted to expose you," Porter said slowly, the words tasting like ash, "who would I tell? You own everyone." Floyd smiled. "Exactly. Now you're beginning to understand the simple beauty of the system I've created." But as Floyd spoke, a sound drifted up from the floorboards. A sound that changed everything. It was faint, but unmistakable. Children's voices, singing softly in the basement below. A sad, haunting melody. And one of those voices sounded terrifyingly familiar. Porter's heart stopped. He knew that voice. He'd heard it 100 times, singing in his neighbor's yard back in town. The girl singing in the basement sounded exactly like his neighbor's daughter, Emma. A sweet 9-year-old girl who had vanished without a trace 3 weeks ago. Floyd noticed the flicker of recognition in Porter's eyes and chuckled softly. "Ah, you recognize someone?" "Yes, we occasionally have to recruit from local families, especially when they can't pay their debts. Emma's father owed a considerable sum to some of my business associates." "Emma Morrison," Porter whispered, his voice shaking. "A sweet child," Floyd said, examining his fingernails with casual indifference. "Clever hands. She'll be perfect for detailed sewing work. Her new owners run a textile operation up north. She'll spend the rest of her life making beautiful clothes for other people's children to wear." A white-hot rage, pure and dangerous, surged through Porter's veins. Emma Morrison had played in his yard. She'd called him Uncle Porter. Just last month, she had brought him a handful of wildflowers she'd picked from her family's garden. The thought of that little girl, trapped in the darkness below, waiting to be sold into a lifetime of slavery, made his vision swim with fury. "You're finished, Floyd," Porter said, his voice low and trembling with a rage he had never known he possessed. "Am I?" Floyd gestured dismissively at his armed men. "You are one man with a book and a few letters. I have an entire territorial government in my pocket, dozens of loyal supporters, and 40 years of experience dealing with self-righteous fools." Porter took one last look around the office, his mind burning every detail into his memory. The maps showing the politicians' families, the correspondence proving the ongoing sales, the blackmail files that were the source of Floyd's power. Everything he needed to destroy this man was right here in this room. But first, he had to get those children out of the basement. "I'll take your offer," Porter said suddenly, his voice now eerily steady. He was lying through his teeth, but he made it sound real. Floyd raised a silver eyebrow. "A wise choice, Mr. Kane. Triple your purchase price, plus a substantial bonus for your discretion. You'll be a wealthy man by sundown." Porter nodded, and slowly, deliberately, reached into his coat. For a second, Floyd and his men thought he was reaching for the book to hand it over. Instead, his hand closed around the heavy glass oil lamp on the corner of the desk. With a roar of fury, he hurled it against the far wall. The glass shattered, and flames instantly erupted, greedily consuming the dry, ancient wood and the blackmail-filled papers tacked to the wall. "Stop him!" Floyd shrieked, his composure finally breaking. But Porter was already moving. He dove behind the heavy oak desk as rifle shots splintered the air around him. The fire spread with terrifying speed, filling the room with thick black smoke and utter chaos. He crawled toward the door, clutching the leather book to his chest like a shield. He had to reach the basement. He had to get Emma and the other children out before the entire orphanage became a raging death trap. Behind him, he could hear Floyd screaming orders, not to capture him, but to save the filing cabinets, to save the records, to save the blackmail network that was the true source of his power. But the fire was too fast, too hot, consuming everything in its path. Porter burst into the hallway and sprinted toward the back of the building, frantically searching for the stairs to the basement. The children's singing had stopped, replaced by a terrified silence. They had heard the gunshots, the screaming. He found it. A narrow staircase, hidden behind a door that looked like a simple broom closet. As he plunged down into the darkness, he could hear small, frightened whispers. "Emma!" he called out, his voice low and urgent. "Emma Morrison! Are you down here?" The whispering stopped. Then, from the oppressive darkness, a small voice he knew so well. "Uncle Porter? Is that really you?" But before he could answer, he heard heavy boots thundering on the stairs above him. Floyd's men were coming, and they weren't planning to let anyone escape alive. Porter stumbled into the damp, musty basement, the smoke from the fire above already starting to seep through the floorboards. In the far corner, illuminated by a single, grimy shaft of light from a small ground-level window, 12 children were huddled together, their faces pale with terror. Emma Morrison broke from the group and ran to him, throwing her small arms around his waist. "Uncle Porter," she sobbed into his coat. "I knew you'd find us. I knew it." "Are you hurt?" Porter asked quickly, his eyes scanning the other children while keeping his voice to a whisper. They were all thin, dressed in rags, but seemed physically unharmed. "We're just scared," Emma whispered back, clinging to him. "The man upstairs said we were going to new homes soon. Some of the older boys tried to escape last week, but the men with guns caught them." Porter's gaze swept across the basement, makeshift beds of straw, a few buckets of stagnant water, and, bolted to the walls, iron chains. These children weren't being held. They were being caged. Prisoners waiting to be sold. "Listen carefully," Porter said, addressing all of them, his voice firm but calm. "We're getting out of here. Right now. But you need to be very, very quiet and do exactly as I say." The heavy footsteps on the stairs were getting closer. He could hear Floyd's men arguing, their voices muffled. "There's another way out," a boy of about 13 whispered, pointing a shaky finger toward a stack of old crates. Behind those boxes. It's a tunnel. We've been digging it. It goes to the old root cellar outside. Porter didn't hesitate. He shoved the boxes aside, revealing a narrow, hand-dug opening in the stone foundation. It was a tight squeeze, but a child could get through. They had been working on their own escape. "You first," Porter told the oldest boy. "Take the little ones. Get them as far from this building as you can. Head toward town, but don't stop until you reach the capital. Find the office of the territorial marshal." "But the lawmen, they work for Floyd," the boy protested, his eyes wide with fear. "Not the local ones," Porter replied, pulling the leather book from his coat and pressing it into the boy's hands. "The federal marshal in the capital. Give him this book. Tell him Porter Kane sent you. Tell him everything." The children began scrambling through the tunnel, one by one. Just as the last and smallest child was crawling through, he heard boots hit the basement floor. Floyd's men were here. Porter helped push the last child into the opening, then spun around, grabbing a broken chair leg as a makeshift club. He was no gunman, but he wouldn't go down without a fight. The first of Floyd's men appeared at the bottom of the stairs, rifle raised. "There he is!" Porter threw himself behind a stack of wooden crates just as a shot rang out, splinters exploding inches from his head. "Floyd wants him alive!" another voice shouted from the stairs. "He's got information we need!" Porter realized with a start that Floyd was more worried about recovering his lost secrets than about killing him. That gave him a sliver of an advantage. They wouldn't shoot to kill, not yet. Using the chair leg as a lever, Porter shoved the heavy stack of crates over, sending them crashing down and creating a barrier between him and the gunman. Then, he dove for the tunnel opening, scrambling into the narrow passage on his hands and knees. He could hear the men cursing behind him, trying to clear the debris and squeeze into the tight space. Their bulky frames made it impossible for them to follow quickly. It was the head start he and the children desperately needed. He emerged from the root cellar into the cool evening air, coughing from the smoke. The children were waiting for him in a cluster of trees, their faces anxious. Emma rushed to his side and grabbed his hand. "What about the bad men?" she asked, her voice trembling. Porter looked back. The orphanage was now a roaring inferno, a funeral pyre for 40 years of secrets. Smoke and embers billowed into the twilight sky. He could see figures running from the blaze, but they were running away, not towards them. Floyd's carefully constructed empire, his records, his blackmail files, his proof of government corruption, it was all turning to ash. But Milton Floyd himself was nowhere to be seen. "He's finished," Porter told the children, hoping it was true. "His operation is destroyed, his records are gone, and soon the whole world will know what he did." As he led the group of freed children toward the distant lights of civilization, Porter knew the hardest part was still to come. They had to convince the authorities to turn on a man who had secretly controlled them for decades. But first, they had to survive the night. Because Milton Floyd was still out there. And now, he had nothing left to lose. 3 months later, Porter Kane stood in the town square. He wasn't a fugitive anymore. He was a witness. He watched as Milton Floyd, now a broken old man in shackles, was led to the gallows. The territorial marshal in the capital had acted with stunning speed once the oldest boy had arrived, clutching Rebecca Hayes's leather book. The evidence of systematic child trafficking, reaching into the highest levels of government, had sent shockwaves through the territory. But the book had contained one final devastating secret Porter hadn't seen. Hidden in a compartment in the back cover were 2 pages, written in Rebecca's own hand. They contained detailed records of every single official Floyd had blackmailed, along with the locations of their family members and copies of the illegal payments he'd made to them. Faced with federal prosecution and the exposure of their own corruption, Floyd's network had crumbled overnight. Emma Morrison, clean and wearing a new dress, ran up to Porter and grabbed his hand. "Papa says you're a hero, Uncle Porter." Porter smiled down at the little girl, now safely back with her family. "I just did what needed to be done, Emma." But it was more than that. Porter had discovered something about himself in the heart of that burning orphanage. He had found a courage he never knew he had, a willingness to risk everything for people he didn't even know. And it had changed him forever. All 12 children from the basement had been reunited with their families or, for the true orphans, placed with loving guardians. The territorial government, now under federal oversight, offered substantial compensation to the victims. New laws were being drafted to ensure such a horror could never happen again. Porter used his reward money not to buy land, but to build a new orphanage in the center of town. A place with open windows, transparent operations, and regular inspections. A place filled with laughter instead of fear. One afternoon, a young woman approached him nervously in the street. "Mr. Kane, my name is Sarah Whitman. I believe you found my name carved into the wall of that old place." Porter's breath caught in his throat. Sarah Whitman, a name from Rebecca's book. Age 7, sold to Fletcher Ranch. "I survived," Sarah said, her voice quiet but strong. "When I heard what you did, I had to come and thank you. Floyd sold me to a rancher who worked me like an animal for 15 years. But thanks to you, he's been arrested too, and I'm finally free." Over the following weeks, more of them appeared. The lost children, now grown men and women. Survivors who had spent decades believing they were alone. The book, Rebecca's true record, gave them back their names, allowing families torn apart by Floyd's lies to find one another after a generation of silence and grief. The federal investigation revealed the full scale of the horror. Over 300 children trafficked across 4 decades. Dozens of ranchers, farmers, and factory owners were arrested. Corrupt officials were stripped of their positions and prosecuted. As the hangman's noose was fitted around Milton Floyd's neck, Porter stood in the crowd, the leather book in his hand. He opened it one last time and read the simple dedication on the first page. "For those who remember." Thanks to the courage of a cook named Rebecca Hayes and a man who just wanted to flip some property, hundreds of victims would finally be remembered, their suffering honored, their justice served. Emma appeared beside him again, this time carrying a slate with her school lessons on it. "Will you come for dinner tonight, Uncle Porter?" she asked, her eyes bright with a future that had been stolen and then returned. "I'd be honored, Emma." As Porter walked toward the Morrison family home, he reflected on how one simple business deal had changed his entire life. He had walked into that orphanage a man looking for profit. He walked out a man who had found his purpose. The secrets buried for decades were finally in the light. The children were safe. And Porter Kane knew he would spend the rest of his days making sure no one was ever forgotten again. If you were moved by this incredible story of courage and justice, click the video on your screen right now to watch another unforgettable tale where one person's bravery changed everything. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing true stories from the American West. And if you'd like to support us in our mission to bring these powerful histories to light, consider leaving a super thanks. Your support helps us research and create these videos that honor the real heroes and victims of the past. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the greatest evil can be defeated by one ordinary person who refuses to look away.